Margaret, welcome to San Luis Obispo County.
Okay, it's going to take me a minute to get this straight. Can you hear me? Please tell me. I hate it when people speak and you can't hear them. Can everybody hear me? So that was the most fabulous video. I loved it, and I want you to appreciate, because I've been a lot of places talking about kids, just how special what you're doing in this county actually is. And my hat is totally off to the First Five Commission. When I voted for Prop 10, when Rob Reiner came around the state and told us how great it was going to be, you've gone way beyond our expectations, because you have really stepped out of just talking about 0 to 5. You've stepped out of just talking about what services we're going to fund, and you're talking about how to mobilize your whole county on behalf of children, how to make this a broad movement with a broad set of issues. It's a crossroads for the First Five Commission. It's a crossroads for the county and the community and the people here. It is an inspiring call to action. And it will require, which is what we're going to talk about today, new approaches, new skills, new players, a new leadership coalition. So I want to just summarize for 1 second, why this is important. You heard the data about the needs of children in San Luis Obispo. You've heard the moral argument. You've heard the comments of your wonderful superintendent of schools, who seems to get the moral and the realistic argument. I want to just share with you for just a minute the opportunity I had a couple of weeks ago to hear just one of the most riveting speeches I've heard about kids. It was given by a demographer from USC, and he spoke about the need for a real radical change in our outlook towards kids and our new social contract with children. He said there is a revolution going on demographically that people really haven't yet appreciated. That in fact our immigration is now stabilizing, and it's going to decline. And the children in our community now who are immigrants and children of immigrants, they're going to stay there. We have a stable immigrant community, and so some of the issues that have overwhelmed us and some of the things that have allowed us to not have to educate our homegrown kids because we have immigrants to take care of the issues, it's not true anymore. Combine that with the fact that we have an absolutely soaring ratio between children and seniors. And I started hearing this data when I first started in this field, but in 1960, there were 5 people in the workforce for everyone on Social Security. Today, there are just under 3 people in the workforce for everyone on Social Security, and by 2040, there will only be 2 people in the workforce for everyone on Social Security. We can't lose a kid. Every kid counts. We can't give up on anyone. So this demographer has sort of calculated this index of children's importance. I love it, which takes all these factors into account. And he says, for a child born in 2010 is twice as important to the future economic security of our country than a child born in 1985. I thought that was a very interesting concept. And his cure, simply as a demographic expert, is universal preschool for all, no dropouts allowed, mentoring and counseling and support for anyone who needs it, and college and financial aid for anyone who needs it. Not about being good. It's all about survival, as well as, of course, doing the right thing. So what do I know about this? I have had, as noted, well over 3 decades, it's really quite a bit over 3 decades now, of fighting for kids in San Francisco, but also traveling all over the country and seeing what this country is doing on behalf of kids. I've had a huge number of successes, which I'll tell you about in a minute, but I do think of it as an endless opportunity to make lemonade out of lemons. This is hard work, and you have as many failures as you have successes, and I'm going to tell you about that. So some people say to me, well, what's a woman from San Francisco doing in San Luis Obispo County? We are a totally different place. We can't do what you do in San Francisco. That is not true. The dynamics of fighting for kids are the same everywhere, because basically the argument against it is they're other people's children, they're not our children, because the people who have the power, who have the vote, who have the money are different from the people who are struggling to raise their kids in our communities. And by the way, San Francisco, we have a lot in common. We have a very small population of kids compared to the rest of the county also. And believe me, that's a major political challenge also that you are going to have to stand up to. So what I want to say is every single success we've had for kids has met a huge amount of resistance. We have had to overcome an enormous amount of resistance. But in the course of 25 years, don't forget it took 25 years, we have created an incredible infrastructure for kids. We have what was the state's first dedicated funding stream for kids. Now it's $50 million a year. We have universal preschool. We have universal health care. 80% of our after-school needs are met. We have the highest percent of kids in subsidized child care of any place in the state. We have the highest amount of local dollars spent on youth jobs, and we have models for teen health, violence prevention, and youth empowerment. Nothing was easy. Every single thing was an enormous struggle. So what are the lessons I've learned from this multi-decade struggle? I'm going to tell you about 6 lessons I've learned as you try to move from aspiration and that marvelous Bill of Rights. I love the Bill of Rights. I love the part about kids having friends. As you move from aspiration to reality and to collective action. So lesson number 1 is everyone can do something. TED talks about this. You can do it on so many levels. I wrote a book called 31 Ways to Save Our Children, and HarperCollins sent me on this multi-city book tour, and everybody got it, that you can do things in your home, you can do things in your community, and you can engage in the public debate. They even made me write a whole page on, things you can do in 5 minutes. And what people said to me, and I won't ever forget it, I don't mind being a drop of water as long as I feel like I'm part of a mighty waterfall. So my best example that I want to tell you about of the waterfall is trying to fight to get decent wages for child care workers. And I'm going to tell you about a lot of the things we did because I think there are lessons in them. So, our theme was child care workers make less than parking lot attendants, which unfortunately is still true in many areas. And we'll pay more to have them watch your car than watch your child. And I thought this was a very difficult struggle, and we didn't make much progress for a long time until the city started getting postcards from the parent of every kid in child care centers around the state. And first they got the postcards, then they got more postcards, and then they got more and more and more postcards, and they called my office and said, "Stop the postcards." Well, of course I said no. I just don't know what you're talking about. I can't stop the postcards. But when we got to 10,000 postcards, and it was more postcards than anybody had ever gotten in our city hall, and this is a little more complicated than I'm making it, but suffice it to say, the money for what we call SF Cares in San Francisco became available. And it became a model program. It gives stipends to child care workers who get more training, and it significantly augmented many people's salaries. But that wasn't the end of it. So what did we do? We took out an ad in the West Coast version of the New York Times because it's cheaper than the Chronicle, and it has a lot of status, and thanked the city for SF Cares, how wonderful it was we cared about child care workers. So the next year, thinking of that ad and the 10,000 postcards, when the city got a tiny windfall of money, partly from the feds, partly that it matched, that it was to use on workforce, the mayor got the brilliant idea. Never would have happened if any of this hadn't happened. I'm going to give all this to child care workers. And we developed a plan called Wages Plus, and all the child care workers who work in centers that serve low-income families get thousands of dollars actually every year added to their salary from Wages Plus. It's a model program. It was a model program around the country. Both Wages Plus and SF Cares are alive today, and trust me, you don't want to touch those programs. No one will touch those programs. The second lesson is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. My husband loves that movie Parenting, you know, when Jason Robards goes, "It's never over, you never get to spike the ball," when he's talking about parenting. And I feel the same way about this work. It's never over. You are embarking on a lifelong mission, but a wonderful one. It's been 15 years since a group of parents that I was working with took a school lunch and placed it on the superintendent's desk. He wasn't there, with a little sign saying, "Can you eat this?" And only last year did our school board finally contract out to a different food provider that is now going to provide fresh food to our kids instead of the frozen food that came in from the Middle West. 15 years. Now, in the meantime, we did a bunch of cool things. We got salad bars. We got rid of the food trucks around the schools. We got the grab-and-go breakfast and nutrition standards. And we still want a kitchen right in San Francisco. So you can see it's never over. And another thing, and maybe I disagree a little bit with Ted about this, if you want to change the way something is, there's always opposition. You can't think you're going to go into this and not expect opposition. We all think we're for kids, we are wonderful, we are wearing our white hats, you know, coming in and a lot of people don't agree with that, or find reasons to say why it can't be done. I mean, think about getting soda out of the schools. Well, who's opposed to that? Obviously, Big Soda. But you can't imagine who else was opposed to that. The gym teachers. Why? Because the vending machines, the money from the vending machines funded a lot of the sports programs. To say nothing, of course, the students who actually like soda. However, you know, it was an education campaign. We took on Big Soda. We found other ways to fund the sports programs, and we were one of the first cities in the country to get soda out of our schools. And the legislation that led to that, the legislation that did that actually is the most popular piece of legislation our school board has ever passed in terms of legislation that is requested from people around the country. So all interests have counter interests. I campaigned to get the YMCA to partner with our Rec and Park department. It meant taking on some city employee unions who somehow saw that as a threat to good labor jobs. Our parent group took on, we want safe playgrounds, and by the way, we want the leash laws enforced. I don't know if you know San Francisco or if you have the same thing here, but SF Dog is a very powerful lobby. And to this day, they still hold me personally accountable for the enforcement of the leash laws. So everything you do, you are, you know, there are people who like it and people who don't like it. And I think it's hard for children's advocates to really, you know, not to really stay the course in the face of that, because you're not used to expecting that. I have spent a lifetime coaxing my colleagues, come on, we got to be more assertive, we got to look to see who's winning these battles and emulate them. And I have developed this theory about kids advocates who, I'm a social worker. I love everybody in the kids field. They are my best friends. They are my allies. They are my colleagues. But I had this idea that those who worked with the youngest kids had the hardest time being aggressive, outspoken, political advocates. The people who work with teens were a little better at standing up, you know, to those in power. But we have the best arguments around. We have the moral argument, the cost argument, the most darling little children imaginable, and my only regret as an advocate are actually things that I didn't do, not the things that I did and lost. So when I watch others, we're good people. When the people in charge say there's no more money, really there's no more money, we go, okay, there's no more money, we won't ask. And then you see they find some money for somebody else. So learning how to keep asking, even though it's scary and they might say no, is really important. The third lesson is what you saw in the video, and what we've all seen a lot in the last couple weeks, is that the authentic voices of young people and parents is really what can win the day. Just watching these Sandy Hook parents and the power and the courage that they have, and they haven't won yet, but they have totally changed the debate. Why? Because it's the people who are most impacted who are having their voice heard. I remember when a member of our Board of Supervisors came up to me and said, Margaret, could you stop bringing those young people to these hearings? It's so hard to say no to them. Well, of course, we keep bringing the young kids, we ratchet it up. But it gave me a great insight as to what was going on. My most vivid example that I love is when we decided to have a baby brigade at City Hall, and we invited, parents and to come with their kids and their strollers, and people came from the child care centers, and the whole thing was absolutely irresistible. We had hundreds of kids and balloons, and it was a lot of noise, and the media came, so our elected officials finally came out. What's going on here? And when I just saw a video of it the other day, when this big limousine comes up to the front of City Hall, and 15 kids about this tall get out of the limousine in their, red, white, and blue overalls. I mean, the whole place just melted. And one of our elected officials, she couldn't stop herself. She got to the cameras, the kids, the excitement. She got to the microphone, and she said, I'm going to be a champion of the high-quality child care fund. That's what we were fighting for at that time. And she said it publicly in front of all these people. I'm not sure she came intending to say that, but she was head of the budget committee, and sure enough, we got a down payment on the high-quality child care fund that year. I just heard last week a member of our youth commission who'd actually been in a solitary cell for a year talk publicly about the fact that we have this very expensive juvenile hall, and the young people in it only get to go outside 1 hour a day, and then only to a small piece of land, despite the fact that there is this huge yard. Well, it seems that the fence around the yard is broken, and they think it's a safety risk, and it's been going on for several years. So it took a young person to get up in front of our elected officials to say, this needs to be a priority. Our playing outside is a major priority. We have wellness centers in every school, and it was young people who made it happen. I don't know about this county, but it's probably the same as ours. The turf battles are not insignificant. We try to overcome them. But in this case, the turf between the school district and the health department made it impossible to do the coordination that it would take to get health centers in the schools. And it was after the Columbine shooting, so it was a while ago, that the young people in the group that I was working with said, we're going to take matters into our own hands. And I remember them going to these meetings, with a lot of adults speak and everything. They were outraged, and they were absolutely passionate about, can't you guys work together? And they got in front of the Board of Supervisors, and they made a passionate case for interagency collaboration, as well as some decent funding that started in a few schools, and again, took 15 years to get to every school, but it is one of the lessons, get your foot in the door, and then you got something to build on. So lesson number 4 is changing policy and fiscal priorities is political. Ted talked about this, and it's not It doesn't have to be partisan, but it's certainly political. You are not going to change policy unless you get involved in the dirty war of politics. And that means people who do daycare centers, people in early childhood, getting involved on a political level, looking who's, making it in the world of politics and who isn't. And I do want to say here that nonprofits can spend 20% of their resources on lobbying. Don't ever think for a minute that you can't get involved in the political fray. That is absolutely no excuse. You invite politicians to your programs, you do meetings, you do testimony. You have clearly done a lot of that, and elections are a gold mine. I would never let an election go by, certainly not an election go by when you're trying to get the Bill of Rights implemented and signed onto, because that's when your elected officials are really listening, unlike more than at any other time. So candidate forums, questionnaires, where are you on the children's, Bill of Rights? This is the first thing we want to see done. Are you for it? Think about this. So we wanted to get after school in more neighborhoods. It's a mayor's race. It's the last 2 weeks of the mayor's race. We get the after-school programs to agree on every day to a different program would bring presents to the 2 mayoral candidates in order to convince them of, what can happen in an after-school program and the creativity that can go on. Well, one candidate by the second week kind of caught on that this could be cool and threw an ice cream party for all the kids. The other candidate stayed in his office or did whatever he was doing and never always saw this as sort of a hostile action on the part of kids. Well, the ice cream guy won, and one of the first things he did is really put some resources into after-school programs. Lesson number 5, and this, I'm glad that Ted set me up for this because I call it the inconvenient truth of child advocacy, and one that, it's about money. It's about a lot of things and being nice and being good and doing the right thing, but it's about money. So I would maintain that every item on your Bill of Rights and in your strategic plan actually costs money. Something as simple as getting parents to read to their kids, or even them make friends and have healthy relationships. It doesn't cost money to have most people do that, but the kids who want to benefit from this are the kids that it does actually cost money to provide the services that allows that to happen. How can that be? I mean, we're talking about parents, though, who maybe don't read, who don't have books in the home, who need to be in a parenting class. We're talking about kids who have social problems that get in the way of their having kids or having friends, or are very isolated and need a structured and supportive program in order to make friends, or who are being bullied. All of this takes adult intervention and structured programs, and it costs money. So that's why I became, number 1, a children's budget champion. We did a children's agenda. I loved it. It was the most beautiful document. I loved it. We got everybody to sign on. It was very important. But a year later, I went, okay, what's going to happen now? And I said, okay, let's form the Children's Budget Coalition. Let's get a down payment on the things that are on our children's agenda. So let's see, where am I? And I will tell you more about that later, but one thing I will say is that a year does not go by in San Francisco when we don't have, as children's advocates, ask for resources for kids, whether it was this year for credit recovery programs or whether it was for money for our playgrounds. There is always an ask. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't, sometimes there's a reallocation, sometimes there is a grant that goes in, and sometimes there is money that is made available to implement our ongoing agenda. That is why I am launching a statewide project, which I would love to come down here and help you with, the goal of which, and Ted and I are like a 1-2 on this, the goal of which is to get local communities to get it together and figure out how to get local dedicated funding streams for kids. There's only 2 ways to get money for kids. One is to get kids their fair share of the money that does exist, and I was glad Ted pointed out that kids do not get their fair share of money that exists, and people shy away from that reality, and they shy away from the idea that we are going to demand a fair share of the current budget for kids. For instance, we had an open space fund, and we did a campaign like, hey, you got to spend a portion of this fund on programs for kids so they can use the open space. Our universal preschool program is actually that. It's a set-aside in the city budget that requires the city to implement a universal preschool. In fact, so basically what happened over a couple of years was that most of the new money in the budget went to preschool. There was enough increase in the budget so that it could go into preschool. Well, hey, that's a good idea to see that most of the new money is going into universal preschool. My biggest success in this was referenced before, which is we are the first city in the state and one of the first in the country to set up a dedicated funding stream for kids. It's called the Children's Fund, and it is exactly what we're talking about. The argument was kids need their fair share of existing money, and they're not getting it. It was implemented over time. It's been in place for 22 years. It started at $6 million. It's now $50 million a year, and it has transformed children's services. It includes also something we called a baseline budget, which you can do, which required the city to calculate what we were currently spending on kids, and we put in the city charter that you couldn't reduce that amount. So at least it was a no cuts, and any new money was given to kids on top of that. Now, I want you to, everybody I've talked to people in 23 counties around the state says, we could never do that in our county, and I want everybody to really reflect and think before you decide something like that. When you talk to a pollster, they will tell you voters love that sort of thing. They love knowing where their money's going to go. They love the kind of accountability that it is. When you talk to your friends in City Hall, the county courthouse, the county elected officials, they hate it. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So that is one of the ways to get money for kids. The second way to get money for kids is also something people are a little scared of, and that's you got to generate some new resources. And communities have been surprisingly receptive to taxes, fees, other kind of revenue streams for kids. In fact, in the last 10 years, there have been 1,500 measures on the ballot for taxes and other kind of funding for services, for public services, and about half of them have passed in spite of the thresholds, Prop 13, in spite of the opposition, in spite of the economy. And I think things are just going to get better. We have a parcel tax that pays salaries for teachers. We have fees on the 49ers tickets that pays for athletics in the schools. We have sales taxes are passing, hotel taxes, and the soda tax is the next frontier. People should be thinking about how to do a soda tax. It can generate millions and millions and millions of dollars to fight childhood obesity and do child health programs. It takes a lot of courage to do this, guys. It is not an easy thing to do, but my experience is that it gets easier rather than harder. As your community gets used to spending money on kids, it gets easier. The sixth lesson is that if you're going to make this Bill of Rights work, you have to have an organization that is leading the charge. And that is what First Five has done to date. I don't know whether they're going to keep doing it or what kind of organization, but somebody has to turn all our random desires into a waterfall and be the infrastructure and be consistent and help everyone participate. It doesn't have to be a huge organization. I did this for 26 years in San Francisco, and the most productive time we had was when we had only 4 people on our staff. People thought we were huge, and we didn't let people come to the office. You know, there were only 4 of us. It was a sort of Wizard of Oz thing, but if you learn how to leverage the resources of your community, you don't need a huge organization, but you do need an organization that's going to lead the charge. So I'm going to close with some ideas I have about some next steps with this. After you get everybody on, how you turn the aspiration into action. And the thing I will say is it's an art, not a science. So there's no cookie cutter way to do this. How you will do it is different from how we did it. But the first thing you have to do is prioritize. At some point, you have to prioritize. You have to pick your first issue to rally around. Dental care for all, universal preschool, kindergarten readiness, whatever it is. I teach a class in organizing, and I teach, how to pick issues, how to pick good issues that are really going to reflect the sentiments of your community. I always say it needs to be big enough to matter, but small enough to win. And I go through the criteria with people, what you should use in order to determine what issue you might want to start with your Bill of Rights. Will it improve lives? Are there clear decision makers who can make it happen? Do people really want it? Have you done the tabling and the focus groups to make sure you're really on board with what people want? Are there potential allies? Does it have a pocketbook angle? Does it set you up for your next effort? That's step one, prioritize. Step two is you got to develop a campaign plan. Every campaign that we all are going to be involved in is a David and Goliath effort, but you have to remember that David won. So the first thing with your campaign is you must develop some intermediate objectives. So we want preschool for all. We're going to start by saying within 2 years, we want 25% more preschool slots. You have to make it specific, and then you have to put a price tag on it. It's going to cost $500,000. It's going to cost $2 million. You have to know what is involved. And then you have to analyze, okay, who can get it to happen? Who has the power? What do they need to know? Who can carry the message? And then you have to develop your strategies. What research do you need to do? What kind of public information? What demonstrations? What direct actions? Number three, now I'm on the steps to getting things to happen. You have to form a coalition. I love the people in this room. You have formed an incredible coalition. You have to keep expanding the coalition and get some unusual suspects. The best coalition I ever formed, and there will never be anything to top it, but it makes the point. I didn't think we could ever get the city and county of San Francisco to serve kids who are homeless on the streets who were not from San Francisco. They had 26 million ways of reasons not to serve those kids. We formed a coalition, of course, with people like the people in this room, but it also was the Archdiocese of San Francisco, the Junior League of San Francisco, and the Alice B. Toklas Gay and Lesbian Democratic Club. You do not say no to that coalition in San Francisco. And as a result of a lot of work on behalf of the coalition, we opened the city's first youth center. It's called the Larkin Street Youth Center for young people on the street, and I am so proud to tell you that its director went to the White House a couple of months ago because it got one of the most outstanding agencies for homeless youth in the country award. And it started out with that coalition. So step number 4, I think you have to have a major communication, spread the word campaign. You know how to do it. You talk to editorial boards, you have press events, you go on the radio, you go on Facebook, you go on Twitter, you write white papers, you do posters, you do brochures, you do petitions, you do lectures, you do meetings. These are all the ways you can get the word out. One of the best campaigns I know about getting the word out is there was a group that wanted an elementary school in the Tenderloin community in San Francisco. It didn't have an elementary school. It was a red light district, and suddenly many, many families were moving in. They started organizing and making so much noise about needing an elementary school. I thought they were totally misguided. This is not the way to do a campaign. It's too expensive. Who's going to do this for you? But they would not stop. The pictures of the kids, the media, the research, and it went on and louder, and more people joined the campaign. So when our school district got ready to put a bond measure on the ballot, even though it was going to cost a lot more money, they put that Tenderloin school in the bond measure. People are now coming from all over the world to see that school. They got a volunteer architect from heaven, and the school is now in place. It's a model community school, and it's fabulous, and it started with the drumbeat in the community and just spreading the word. The last step that I say is in terms of turning this into reality, is to take your proposal to the decision makers. And notice that I made that the last step, not the first step, because this is a mistake that people make a lot. You need to build the momentum and the community demand, and before you start going to your elected officials. Last meeting I was at, somebody was sitting next to the president of their board of supervisors and just had the idea, well, hey, I'll just ask her if she'll do it, and of course she'll say yes, and we don't have to go through all this stuff. Not true. First of all, her colleagues may not want to do it. Second of all, she'll run into all kinds of problems. If you have the momentum and you have the allies and you have the coalition, first of all, they might come to you, but second of all, you stand a much greater chance of success. And if you do all these things, I absolutely guarantee something good is going to happen that's going to take you on the way to being able to implement this Bill of Rights. I mean, maybe it'll be a compromise. Heaven forbid it isn't just a task force, but it may be, and you can make a task force into something good, but something good is going to happen. Now, this is a very favorite quote of child advocates, so I'm going to read it to you, of all advocates. The Margaret Mead quote, you've probably heard it, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I really believe in that quote, and I believe that this group can be that small group. So my final story will be how I came to truly believe that this quote is the gospel. So we'd finished with our children's agenda. We'd done it for, it took several years. It was a magnificent document. A year later, we realized, as I said, that, nothing really had happened. And in fact, some of the people who voted on it couldn't even remember it. So we formed the Children's Budget Coalition. And we went through 3 years of the most remarkable budget advocacy, certainly the city's ever seen, and maybe some of the best in the country. We submitted budgets every year. This is what we want for kids. This is how much it's going to cost. This is why it's cost effective. This is what the research tells us. And in fact, we'll even give you some ideas about where to get the money. So don't always do that. We proposed taking money out of the box from the money the city paid to give all the elected officials box seats to the 49er and Giants games. They did not like that. But I'm telling you, even though they didn't like it, they got attention, and there was a certain amount of guilt money involved. We did guerrilla theater and testimony editorials, all the things we're talking about. However, great success at the beginning. Then the eyes started glazing over. The city had financial problems. It was 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. We're meeting with the mayor saying, fund this, fund that. And he's saying, look outside. Look who's demonstrating outside. It's the fire department. And we look outside. It's the fire department and all their sisters and their cousins and their aunts. And he says, who am I going to fund? The children's advocates or the fire department? So we gave the mayor a D that year for his efforts on behalf of children, and realized we could not fight this budget battle every single year at this level. So we developed a proposal to amend the city charter to earmark a certain amount of money for kids, a portion of the city's general fund, and we did the baseline budget, and it was a very daring idea. And it was not an insignificant amount of money. And here is the important part of the story. We took our idea about a children's amendment to the city charter, and we went to every single person on the Board of Supervisors. I know this because I did it myself, along with a lot of other people, every elected official, and to a person, they all said, absolutely not. We will never support that. It ties our hands. It's bad public policy. Look at the city's budget woes. It will be a bad precedent. We cannot support this. So we were discouraged, but we were not beaten. And we said, well, what would the public say? What would the people outside government say? And we figured maybe we could get this thing on the ballot just by public initiative. And we figured, hey, if we lose, we've had an incredible opportunity to talk about children's issues. So we crafted a ballot measure that created a children's fund, and our board of directors of Coleman Advocates for Children, which I was the director of, voted, some reluctantly, to move forward with it. In fact, the person who made the motion was a public policy expert who said, this is terrible public policy. I can't stand it. But it's the best we can do. We can't think of anything better, and that's why we're going to move forward and do it. No proposal is perfect, and you have to get over the fact that you think it is. So we started gathering signatures. You can put things on the ballot through a petition of the voters. We had an army of dedicated people collecting signatures. We needed over 50,000, and we discovered people like to stand next to us, the other signature gatherers. There are a lot of signature gatherers in San Francisco because we were getting more signatures than anybody else. The Children's Amendment. Do you want fund child health? Do you want to, fund child recreation? And people signed it, and we got 68,000 signatures. So on the day the signatures were due, an enthusiastic group of children's supporters went into City Hall, pulling little red wagons with the signatures piled high in the little red wagons. It's a lot of signatures. It's a lot of little red wagons. We walked around the rotunda of City Hall. We sang camp songs. And finally, the media came out. We'd never gotten any media attention. And the supervisors came out as we proudly declared that this was going to be on the ballot. And then, because we had taken the initiative, because we had framed the issue, because we had shown that there was support, because we had used power we didn't even know that we had. We'd made these buttons saying, I heart kids, and we dared people to write the I don't heart kids buttons. And so here is the lesson. By the end of the day, it was the political turnabout of all time and the political lesson for me of a lifetime. By the end of the day, all but one member of the Board of Supervisors had called our office and said, please put my name as a supporter on the next piece of literature that you send out on the Children's Fund. So the measure won, and it transformed children's services, and I learned the political lesson of a lifetime. So my message to you is, you can do this. You won't do it exactly the same way we did it in San Francisco, but you'll do it in a way that reflects the values and the culture of San Luis Obispo. And that's how I think your Bill of Rights is going to become a reality. It's going to be an ongoing campaign of the Children's Bill of Rights Coalition. You're in it for forever, but it can happen. And as the saying goes, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. Thanks a lot, guys. I love what you've done. It's fabulous.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you.